Miyazaki waited for his name. It never came. He was not selected for the Kamikaze mission. The order to crash into the enemy had been given, but his name was not called. Under flickering lantern light at Clark Airfield in the Philippines, Lieutenant Commander Shingo read the list of volunteers. One by one, men stepped forward. Chief Petty Officer Isamu Miyazaki stood still, waiting. The call never reached him. Instead, he was ordered to return to Japan, a reprieve that would haunt him long after the war. But this moment was not the beginning. The war had started years earlier, on December 7, 1941, for Petty Officer First Class Kaname Harada. December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy strikes Pearl Harbor. Petty Officer First Class Kaname Harada circles high above the Japanese fleet, leading combat air patrol. His orders are to guard the carriers, not to attack. He watches his friend, Lieutenant Fusada Ida, lead the 3rd Buntai, a division of 9 Zeros, toward the island of Oahu. Harada follows them for a short distance, then banks away. The knot in his stomach will not loosen. Harada Zero was the first plane off the deck of the carrier Soryu that morning, but he is not in the fight. He feels his guts boil with envy as the strike force disappears toward the rising sun. Hours later, the planes return. Ida does not. He crashed his damaged Zero into Kanayoi Naval Station rather than be captured. 2 of his wingmen crash at sea. A separate pilot from another unit crash lands on the island of Niihau. 3 men from Ida's 9-plane unit never come back. Harada wonders if he could have saved them. Harada is a fighter pilot built for speed and aggression. But this morning, he is a spectator. He has flown combat missions in China. He has seen what happens when men burn. Yet standing on the wooden flight deck, watching his friend's empty place in formation, he feels something new, the dull weight of guilt. For the rest of the war, he will carry the question of whether being on patrol that morning was a punishment or a mercy. 4 months later, in the skies above Tokyo Bay, another Japanese pilot watches twin-engine bombers drone past his wingtip. Isamu Miyazaki is a 22-year-old petty officer. He has not yet seen combat. His unit has been warned that the Army is test flying 2 new twin-engine planes today. The bombers below him match that description. He does not give them a second look. Then the AA guns open fire. Miyazaki sees black puffs of smoke dotting the sky around the bombers. He thinks the gunners are making a mistake. He tries to radio a warning, but the frequency is jammed with excited chatter. Then a huge column of smoke rises from the Yokosuka shipyard. Only then does he realize the truth. Those are not test planes. Those are American B-25 bombers from the carrier Hornet. The Doolittle Raiders have slipped through the net. His flight leader, Kenichi Kashimura, leads them down to land. But by the time they are ordered back into the air, the bombers are gone, the raid is over. Miyazaki chases phantoms all day, finding nothing. He remembers Kashimura's lesson, check your tail before you fire, but he never even got a chance to fire. The missed opportunity gnaws at him for years. If only he had flown closer to inspect those planes, he would have shot them both down. Instead, he spends the afternoon chasing empty air. Enjoying the story? Subscribe to join us for the next one. June 4th, 1942. Harada is again on combat air patrol over the Japanese fleet. Below him, the carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu steam toward Midway Atoll. Inside his flight suit is the silver Onshi pocket watch, an imperial gift from the emperor awarded to the top graduate of his aviation class. He thinks of home, of his wife and newborn daughter. Then the slow American torpedo bombers appear, skimming the waves. Harada leads his wingmen into the attack. In his fury, he cuts off his own wingman, Airman Genzo Nagasawa. Nagasawa takes a burst of machine gun fire in the belly of his Zero and explodes into flames. Harada screams his name. The wreckage bounces off the sea. Harada lands briefly to rearm, but before his ammo drums are changed, the dive bombers come. American SBD Dauntlesses fall out of the sky like stones. 3 Japanese carriers are hit within minutes. Harada claws for altitude but cannot intercept them. He finds one remaining carrier, the Hiryu, and takes off again. Seconds after he leaves the flight deck, a bomb explodes right behind the forward elevator. He watches the Hiryu disappear under a hood of smoke and flame. He is out of ammunition. He has no carrier left to land on. Harada flies toward a friendly destroyer and ditches his Zero in its wake. The deck crew waves at him, but before they can pick him up, B-17s appear overhead. The destroyer flees. As darkness falls, Harada floats alone. His kapog vest is losing buoyancy. He is losing hope. Around midnight, a black shape appears. The destroyer Makigumo has returned. They haul him aboard. His wristwatch stopped at 3:55 the moment he hit the water. The deck is packed with wounded and dying men. He is alive. He will survive to fight another day. By October 1942, the tide had turned. Harada was flying from the carrier Hayo, part of a strike against Guadalcanal. The Americans called it the Cactus Air Force, and they owned the sky over the island. Harada's formation of 9 Zeros was guarding 9 Cape bombers when a squadron of Marine F-4F Wildcats tumbled out of a cloud. Harada locked onto one and went head-on, trading fire at close range. A .50 caliber round smashed into his engine, and a piece of shrapnel tore through his left bicep. The Zero shuddered, and his canopy was punched with holes. Blood soaked his flight suit, but he felt no pain, only shock. He killed the engine before it caught fire and began a long glide toward the jungle, his arm hanging limp. The Zero struck a palm tree and flipped upside down, trapping him like a bird in a cage. He pushed through the bent canopy with his feet, tore open his trouser leg on a machine gun mount, and crawled out into the soft earth. He stumbled through the brush and came across a crashed Kate bomber. Standing beside it was a familiar face, Petty Officer First Class Isamu Sato, a fellow pilot from the Soryu. Inside the wreck was their radio man, Tadao Maruyama, pinned and dying. They tried to free him, but the metal was too twisted. Maruyama's eyes went still. Sato and Harada spent the night beside the bodies, holding each other's hands against the fever in the dark. At dawn, they walked north through the jungle toward a tiny midget sub-base at Kimimbo Bay. Harada's arm turned infected and raw. He treated it with seawater. A few days later, a boat evacuated him to Cape Esperance, then by destroyer to Truk Lagoon's hospital. He spent weeks in a fever, drifting between nightmares of burning carriers and drowning men. Petty Officer Isamu Miyazaki arrived at Rabaul in November 1942. He was a green pilot assigned to the 252nd Air Group, flying the new clipped-wing Zero Model 32. On November 12th, he lifted off to escort Betty bombers attacking an American convoy off Guadalcanal. The sky was full of flak, white, black, red, and blue bursts that smelled of cordite. A Marine Wildcat dropped on him from above. Miyazaki threw his Zero into a tight turn, and for a moment he heard the voice of his old instructor, Kenichi Kashimura, shouting in his hometown accent, "Check your tail before you fire." He did. The Wildcat was there. He turned inside it, lined up the shot, and fired. The American plane tumbled into the jungle, his first victory. But his squadron leader, Lieutenant Masaji Suganami, was not impressed. As soon as they landed, Suganami screamed at Miyazaki in front of the whole unit.
"Why did you break formation? Damn it! I told you to stay with me."
Miyazaki stood rigid, his face burning. He had chased the enemy alone, exactly as Kashimura had warned him never to do. He promised himself he would never leave formation again. That night, he wrote his mother a letter saying he had finally done his duty. He did not mention the reprimand. Suganami himself never came home. He went missing in action over Guadalcanal on November 14, 1942. On January 7, 1943, Miyazaki's luck ran out. He was escorting transport ships near Lae, New Guinea, when a P-38 Lightning hit his engine. Oil pressure dropped to zero. He slid over the waves and pancaked the Zero into the sea. The plane sank beneath him, and he bobbed to the surface in his kapok vest alone. He stripped off his boots and trousers, then tied his white silk scarf around his waist. An old trick. It looked like a false tail, something to fool the sharks. He kept his pistol ready, but the current pushed him toward shore, and he crawled onto a beach, exhausted and thirsty. 3 native men appeared, carrying sharp tools. Miyazaki raised his pistol, but one of them smiled and said, "Japan, soldier?" They gave him water and led him to a small outpost where 3 Japanese coast watchers lived in a European-style house left over from the German era. They fed him, radioed his unit, and told him a supply boat would come in a few days. When it arrived, one of the soldiers handed him a gift wrapped in a banana leaf, a necklace made of crocodile teeth. "You almost became their lunch," the soldier said with a grin. Miyazaki tied it around his neck and carried it back to Rabaul, a memento of the day he survived the sea, the sharks, and the war. But Miyazaki's luck could not protect his old instructor. In March 1943, Kashimura was shot down over the Russell Islands. He never returned. Miyazaki carried the weight of his lost mentor for the rest of the war. In October 1943, Chief Petty Officer Isamu Miyazaki was stationed on Taroa Island in the Maloalap Atoll. He was part of the 252nd Air Group, tasked with defending Japan's shrinking perimeter. On October 6, an urgent call came from Wake Island. The atoll had been smashed by an American carrier raid, and most of its fighters were destroyed. Reinforcements were needed immediately. Miyazaki was part of a flight of 7 Zeros that took off from Roy, heading for Wake on a 5-hour journey. They escorted 7 Betty bombers, but the formation was jumped by new American fighters about 65 kilometers from Wake. These were Grumman F-6F Hellcats, more powerful and better armored than anything Miyazaki had faced before. The Bettys scattered under the attack. In the chaos, Miyazaki lost sight of his flight leader. His fuel was running low and he could not find Wake Island. He admits he felt a cold wave of panic. He led 2 remaining wingmen up to 8,000 meters, hoping to spot land. Below them, he counted 23 American warships, part of the task force that had just crushed Wake. He planned to dive as Zero into an enemy ship when the fuel ran out. But then he spotted a lone Hellcat flying in from a different direction. He turned toward the Hellcat's origin and found a break in the clouds. Below it sat Wake Island. He forced his Zero down on a bomb-cratered runway, barely stopping before a revetment. His wingmen landed behind him, one on a collapsed gear. They were alive. After a week on truck, the surviving pilots were called to the dock to board 3 Emily flying boats for the flight to Saipan, then to Japan. On the dock, Funaki called Miyazaki into his plane for company. Miyazaki swapped seats with Kosaka again and boarded the second Emily. The first 2 flying boats lifted off the water without trouble. The third plane began its takeoff run, but it porpoised hard on the waves. Its wingtip caught the water and the giant aircraft cartwheeled into the sea, disintegrating instantly. 6 of Miyazaki's friends were killed, along with the Emily's crew. Kosaka was among the dead. Miyazaki stood on the dock, staring at the wreckage, knowing he should have been on that plane after months of rebuilding the shattered squadron in Japan. The Navy sent him back into the fight. On October 24, 1944, Chief Petty Officer Isamu Miyazaki stood in the darkness at Clark Airfield in the Philippines. Around him, exhausted pilots gathered under flickering lantern light. Lieutenant Commander Hideki Shingo addressed the men with words that cut through the humid air. All remaining ships were damaged, he said. The only way to fight now was to crash into the enemy directly. Tai-Atari attacks. Shingo ordered a list of volunteers for the Kamikaze units. He read the names aloud in a flat, deliberate voice. One name followed another. Men stepped forward, forming a new, jagged line. Miyazaki stood still, waiting for his own name. It never came. He was not selected. Instead, he received an order to return to Japan with a small group of experienced pilots. Miyazaki boarded a transport plane and left the Philippines as American forces closed in. He later learned that many of the men who stayed behind died in suicide attacks. The crocodile tooth necklace, given to him by a soldier after his ditching in New Guinea, remained tucked inside his flight jacket. It was a small, tangible symbol of the luck that had followed him through the war. By early 1945, Miyazaki was assigned to the 343rd Air Group under Captain Minoru Genda, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack. The unit flew the new Shidenkai fighter, a rugged plane with a mid-wing design and powerful engine. The 343rd was Japan's last hope for air defense, but fuel was scarce and replacement pilots were barely trained. The war was collapsing faster than anyone could admit. On August 9, 1945, Genda gave the squadron a rare day off. Miyazaki and several other pilots drove to a hillside near Nagasaki for a picnic. They sat under the trees eating from metal bento boxes. Far above, two shiny B-29s droned across the sky. Parachutes drifted down in the distance, instruments, not men. Without warning, a massive flash split the horizon. A column of fire and smoke rose above the city, expanding into a churning mushroom cloud. The shockwave rumbled across the hillside. Moments later, the pilots scrambled down the mountain and raced back to the base. Genda ordered every available vehicle to Nagasaki to help the wounded. Miyazaki drove into the city and witnessed the devastation firsthand. The trucks returned to the base loaded with injured civilians. That night, Miyazaki understood that the war could not continue. There was nothing left to defend. On August 15, 1945, the Emperor's voice crackled over the radio at noon. Special Lieutenant Kaname Harada was in Hokkaido, training young pilots for the final battle. The reception was poor, but the meaning was clear. The war was over. Harada gathered his men and told them to remain calm. Some spoke of marching into the hills to fight as guerrillas. Harada ordered them to stop. It was time to protect the people, not die for the past. At Omura Air Base in Kyushu, Miyazaki listened to the same broadcast. The voice of the Emperor, the voice of the crane, was thin and strained. That evening, the officers and warrant officers were ordered to assemble at the Kenman Hall with their sidearms. The word was Jiketsu, honorable suicide. Captain Genda stood at the entrance, carrying a sword wrapped in white cloth. He told the men with wives and children to return home. The assembly dissolved. No one died that night. When the war ended, Kaname Harada returned to his family in Nagano Prefecture. He struggled to find work under the stigma of having been a military pilot. Eventually, he founded an award-winning private kindergarten. He taught the children to respect themselves and the value of human life. Harada never saw his friend Sato again. In October 1944, Sato was killed on a kamikaze mission off Formosa. Harada also never forgot his friend Lieutenant Fusada Ida, who died crashing his Zero into Kaneohe Naval Station on December 7th. Isamu Miyazaki returned to his family's sake brewing business in Kure. He rarely spoke of his years in the cockpit, but he kept the crocodile tooth necklace until his death in April 2012. Miyazaki never forgot his mentor Kenichi Kashimura, who was shot down over the Russell Islands in 1943. Both men carried the weight of the dead. Both chose to live. They were not heroes who shouted slogans at the moment of death. Harada once said that the last word spoken by many dying men was not the Emperor's name. It was the name of a wife or a mother. That is the truth of war. It is not glory or empire. It is a man who looks at an enemy pilot over Guadalcanal, sees his own reflection, and decides not to fire. If you have a story from your own family, a memory of someone who served or survived, we would like to hear it. Share it in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel and give this video a like to support our work. Thank you for listening.